I was 8 months pregnant the night I found out my husband had another woman. I didn't find it in a text message. I didn't find it in a lipstick stain. I found it through the baby monitor I had just set up in the nursery. His office intercom had crossed wires with the receiver, and I stood there, one hand on my belly, and I heard him say to her, "Don't come home tonight. She's asleep by 9. I'll be there by 10. He called her baby. I walked downstairs. I poured a glass of water. I did not scream. I did not cry. I smiled at him when he came to bed. I kissed his forehead. Because 2 days later, the papers arrived at my door. My billionaire husband was divorcing me and trying to prove in court that the child inside me was not his. He left me for his mistress. He left me at 36 weeks pregnant. But 7 years later, at his family's charity gala, he froze when he saw me walk in, because standing next to me in a small navy suit was a little boy with his eyes. And what my son said to him next is a moment I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Quick meaning. This is a story about a woman who lost everything she thought defined her and discovered that the life she was forced to build was more beautiful than the one she was robbed of. It is a story about dignity, about what fatherhood truly means, and about the quiet kind of justice that does not need revenge to be complete. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, if you have ever had to rebuild from the ground up, or if you simply believe that a woman's worth is never defined by the man who walked away, please tap that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel, and in the comments, tell me one word that describes the strongest woman you have ever known. Let's hear her story, while I tell you mine.
Don't come home tonight. She's asleep by 9. I'll be there by 10. Eleanor Whitfield stood in the doorway of the nursery, one hand on her belly, one hand flat against the wall. 8 months pregnant, 36 weeks, if you asked her doctor. 36 weeks and 3 days, if you asked Eleanor. She had been counting, and her husband's voice was coming through the baby monitor. She had forgotten the monitor was on. She had turned it on that afternoon to test the batteries. The receiver sat on the changing table, blinking, listening, and somehow the frequency had crossed with Graham's office intercom downstairs. A quirk of the old house, a glitch she had meant to have fixed. The laughter came next, a woman's laugh, low, familiar in its shape. Though Eleanor could not place the voice, Eleanor did not move. She barely breathed. "I know, baby, I know. Just a few more months, then we can stop pretending." That was Graham's voice, her husband's voice, saying baby to someone who was not her. The nursery smelled of fresh paint, pale yellow. She had painted the walls herself 3 weeks ago in overalls and a bandana, with Graham's credit card buying pizza for the movers. She had thought she was nesting. She had thought she was building something. She was building a crib for a child whose father was making phone calls to another woman from the office downstairs. "Don't worry about the ring," Graham's voice said through the small plastic speaker. "After the baby's born, I'll figure out the timing. Just hold on." Eleanor turned. Quietly, she walked down the staircase, one hand on the banister, one hand under her belly. She walked past Graham's office door. She could hear him inside, pacing, laughing at something the other woman said. She walked into the kitchen. She poured a glass of water from the filtered tap. She drank it standing at the white marble island. The baby kicked her, hard, under her ribs. She placed her hand there. She whispered, "Okay, okay, okay." She said it 3 times, like a mantra, like a woman deciding something. Graham came home at 10:47 that night. Eleanor knew the exact time because she had been watching the clock on the microwave. She had told herself she was waiting for a cup of chamomile tea to steep. She had told herself a lot of things. He walked into the kitchen, tall, broad-shouldered, hair still combed the way his mother had taught him. He smelled like cedar and something else, something floral, something that was not her shampoo. "Hey, sweetheart," Graham said. He bent down. He kissed her forehead. "How are my 2 favorite people?" Eleanor smiled. She said, tired. My ankles are huge." "Let me see," Graham said. He pulled out a kitchen stool. He sat down in front of her. He lifted her foot into his lap. He rubbed her ankle with both hands. His wedding ring caught the kitchen light. Eleanor looked at his face, his kind face, his careful, practiced, kind face, and she thought, this is what a liar looks like. This is what they look like when they think they've won. "How was the office?" she asked. "Long," Graham said. "Meetings all night. I could barely see straight by the end." "Poor thing," Eleanor said. She reached out. She ran her hand through his hair. "You work too hard." "For us," Graham said. He looked up at her. He smiled. "I work too hard for us." Eleanor smiled back. She held his gaze. She did not blink. "I'm going up to bed," she said. "You coming?" "In a minute," Graham said. "I just need to answer a few emails." Eleanor nodded. She kissed the top of his head. She walked upstairs. She brushed her teeth. She lay down on her left side the way the pregnancy books told her to, and she waited until she heard his breathing slow beside her. Shallow, then deep, then the slight whistle he made through his nose when he was truly under. Eleanor slipped out of bed. She walked barefoot down the carpeted hall, past the nursery, down the stairs, into Graham's office. His laptop was still open on the desk. The screen had dimmed, but not locked. He had meant to close it. He had forgotten. Eleanor sat down in his chair. Her belly pressed against the edge of the desk. She touched the trackpad. The screen woke up. She was not looking to spy. She was looking for a baby registry. She had told Graham that morning that his assistant needed to confirm the crib delivery. She had thought she would look up the email. She had told herself that, she really had, but she opened his Google Calendar instead. She scrolled back, week by week, month by month, every Tuesday, every single Tuesday, for 19 months. TB dinner, 7 p.m. Sometimes it said TB drinks. Sometimes it said TB project review. 19 months of Tuesdays. Eleanor had been pregnant for 8 of those months. They had been trying for a baby for 6 months before that, which meant if Eleanor was doing the math right, and she was doing the math right, Graham had started having Tuesday dinners with TB the same week they had started trying to conceive. She closed the calendar. She opened his inbox. She typed 3 letters into the search bar. TB Bainbridge, 2,407 emails. Eleanor made a small sound in the back of her throat. Not a sob, not a gasp, something smaller, something more specific. The sound a woman makes when she finally understands something she has been refusing to understand for a very long time. She clicked the most recent email. The subject line read, "She'll never know. Just hold on until the baby is born." Eleanor read it twice. Then she closed the laptop, softly. The way you close a book, you will not be finishing. She stood up. She walked to the bathroom, off the office. She closed the door. She turned on the light. She looked at herself in the mirror. A woman she barely recognized looked back. 8 months pregnant, swollen cheeks, puffy eyes, a woman in a nightgown in a house that was apparently not hers in the way she had thought it was. Eleanor walked to the tub. She stepped in. She sat down. She was still wearing her nightgown. The porcelain was cold under her thighs. The bathroom fan hummed. Somewhere in the house, the refrigerator hummed back. She did not cry. She sat in the empty bathtub for a long time. She counted her own breathing. She thought about the nursery upstairs, the pale yellow walls, the crib she had assembled herself because Graham had been too busy. She thought very clearly, I'm not crazy. I knew. Somewhere in me, I knew for months. She thought, he planned this. While I was picking out cribs, he planned this. Then she thought about her baby, about the small person kicking inside her, about what she owed him, and what she did not owe the man upstairs. She placed both hands on her belly. She whispered to her son, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's got us. Mommy's got us." Then she got out of the tub. She walked upstairs. She lay down next to her sleeping husband. She stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. She did not sleep. She made a plan. "I need an attorney, a good one, someone who doesn't lose." Eleanor set it into her phone at 7 in the morning. She was sitting in her car in the parking lot of a grocery store, 3 miles from her house. She had told Graham she was going out for bagels. Delphine was on the other end of the line. Delphine, her best friend of 12 years, the woman who owned the bakery on Mulberry Street, the woman who had been the maid of honor at her wedding. "Ellie," Delphine said. "Honey, breathe. Tell me what happened." Eleanor told her, in short sentences, like reading a police report. When she was done, Delphine was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I knew something was wrong. I've known for months. I should have said something." "It's not your fault," Eleanor said. "His name is Rowan Callahan," Delphine said. "He did my cousin's divorce. He's a bulldog. I'll text you the number." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "Ellie," Delphine said, "I love you. Whatever you need, I'm here." Eleanor hung up. She sat in the parking lot. She watched a woman load groceries into her minivan. 2 small children in the back seat. The woman looked tired. The woman looked happy in the tired way that women get when their hands are full. Eleanor thought, that was supposed to be me. Then she thought, that still will be me, just differently. She called Rowan Callahan. Rowan Callahan's office was in a renovated brownstone downtown. No marble, no fountains, just clean white walls and black and white photographs of bridges. He was 40, tall, broad-shouldered, a slight Boston accent. He did not smile when she walked in. He shook her hand firmly. He said, "Sit down. Tell me everything," Eleanor told him. This time she let herself shake, just a little. When she was done, Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to be blunt with you. Is that okay?" "Please," Eleanor said. "You are about to become a mother in 4 weeks. Your husband is cheating on you. He has been moving money for, based on what you described, at least 6 months. If you want to survive this, financially and emotionally, you have to start documenting tomorrow. Today, actually. Right now." Eleanor nodded. "I need you to go home," Rowan said, "and act completely normal. Do not confront him. Do not pack a bag. Do not call your mother in a way he could overhear. You are going to get him to reveal himself, and you are going to protect your child." "What does he want?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know yet," Rowan said, "but men who plan this carefully always want something. We're going to find out what it is, and then we're going to stop him from getting it." Eleanor took a deep breath. She said, "What do I do first?" "First," Rowan said, "you go home. Second, you smile at your husband. Third, you give me 48 hours to start pulling records." "That's it?" "That's it. Let him think you don't know. It's the most valuable thing we have right now." Eleanor left the office. She drove home. She walked in the door. Graham was in the kitchen, eating toast. "You were gone a long time," he said. "Line was crazy," Eleanor said. She held up the bag of bagels she had bought on the way home. "Worth it, though. Everything bagels, your favorite." Graham smiled. He kissed her cheek. He said, "You are the best wife in the world." Eleanor smiled. She said, "I know." She spent the next 3 days in silence, cooking, smiling, watching, gathering. She photographed credit card statements. She forwarded emails to a new Gmail account Rowan had her set up. She wrote down names, dates, hotels. On the fourth day, Rowan called her. His voice was tight. Mrs. Whitfield, we have a problem. Your husband has been moving assets for 6 months. Real estate, investment accounts, into shell companies. On paper, you are nearly broke. Eleanor sat down on the bottom step of the staircase. Her belly rested on her thighs. She said, "How broke?" "The joint account has $40,000 in it. That's all I can find in your name. The prenup you signed 7 years ago entitled you to 10% of marital assets. He has been hiding the assets. Can we prove it?" "We can prove it, but he's going to fight." Eleanor took a breath. She said, "Okay." That night, Graham came home with roses. 2 dozen, deep red, the kind he had brought her on their first anniversary. "I've been distant," he said. "I know I have. Work has been brutal. But after the baby is born, I want us to take that trip to Maine. Just us, a little family. What do you think?" Eleanor took the roses. She put them in a vase. She said, "That sounds wonderful, Graham." She almost cried. That was the worst part. A part of her, a stupid, hopeful, loving part of her, still wanted to believe him, still wanted the Maine trip, still wanted to think this was all a terrible mistake. "He's my husband," a voice inside her whispered. "He's the father of my baby." Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm crazy. Then she thought about the email. She'll never know. Just hold on until the baby is born. She was not crazy. She had never been crazy. That was the worst part, too. 2 days later, at 4 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Eleanor was 36 weeks and 5 days pregnant. She had been folding onesies on the couch. She waddled to the door. She opened it without checking the peephole. A man in a gray suit stood on her porch. He held a large envelope. He said, "Eleanor Whitfield? Yes? You've been served. Have a nice day, ma'am." He walked away. Eleanor stood in the doorway, the envelope in her hand, the afternoon sun behind her, the neighbor's sprinkler clicking on across the street. She closed the door. She walked to the kitchen. She sat down at the table. She opened the envelope. Divorce petition, prenuptial enforcement, request for paternity testing. She read the last line twice. Request for paternity testing. Her husband was trying to prove that the baby inside her was not his. Eleanor did not cry. She walked to the freezer. She pulled out a pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream. She grabbed a serving spoon. She stood at the kitchen island, still in her slippers, and she ate the ice cream straight from the carton. She ate until her teeth hurt from the cold. Then she ate more. She thought, he planned this. While I was picking out cribs, he planned this. Her phone rang. It was Rowan. "I just got a copy of the petition," he said. "Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm in my kitchen," Eleanor said. "Good. Listen to me. He's making a calculated legal move. If he can argue the child isn't his, the no-issue clause of your prenup means you get almost nothing." "Nothing," Eleanor repeated. Her voice sounded far away. "And there's more. Tessa Bainbridge is listed as a witness. That's the mistress. Bainbridge. It's the same initials as the calendar entries." Eleanor sat down on the kitchen floor, slowly, her back against the cabinet. "How long?" she asked. "I don't know yet, but we will." Eleanor nodded, even though he could not see her. She said, "Rowan, I need you to listen to me carefully." "I'm listening." "I deserved better than this. I deserved a husband who answered the phone. I deserved a man who didn't do this to a pregnant woman." "Yes, you did. So we are going to fight him, and we are going to win. Do you understand me?" Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, Mrs. Whitfield, I understand you." Eleanor hung up. She stayed on the floor. She put her hand on her belly. The baby kicked her. Hard. She whispered, "I hear you. Mommy hears you." She stayed there until the kitchen grew dark around her. The next morning, At 9 o'clock, 3 men in blue jumpsuits rang her doorbell. Eleanor opened the door in her robe. "Ma'am," the first one said. He held up a clipboard. "We're here to move the household items listed on this order. Mr. Whitfield arranged it yesterday." "Can I see the order?" Eleanor asked. He handed it to her. It was a standard moving contract, drawn on Whitfield Holdings letterhead. Graham's signature at the bottom. Items to be moved. All items from master suite. All items from office. All items from guest room 3. Eleanor looked up. "And where are these items going?" "Storage facility, ma'am. Address on page 2. Eleanor read page 2. A storage unit in an industrial park she had never heard of. 30 miles from the house. She said, "My husband is divorcing me, and apparently I'm being moved. Just let me get dressed." She said it flat. No tears, no shouting. The 3 men glanced at each other. One of them said, "Ma'am, we can come back another time if this is a bad—" "No," Eleanor said. "Come in. Do your job. It's not your fault." She went upstairs. She changed into a maternity dress. She called Delphine. She said, "Del, can I come stay with you for a few days?" "Oh, sweetheart," Delphine said. "Get your things and come. I'll make up the spare room right now." The movers worked for 4 hours. Eleanor sat in the living room on the one couch that was not on the list. She watched them carry out Graham's suits, his shoes, his golf clubs. Then they started on her things, her clothes, her books, her jewelry box. They walked into the nursery. Eleanor stood up. "Wait, that room is not on your list." The first mover checked his clipboard. "Ma'am, it's listed here, guest room 3, items to be moved." "It's not a guest room. It's a nursery." "I'm sorry, ma'am. The order is the order." Eleanor walked into the nursery. She stood in the middle of the room, the pale yellow walls, the white crib she had assembled, the rocking chair by the window, the small framed photographs of sonograms on the wall. She said very softly, "He wants me to have nothing." She did not cry. She told the mover, "Fine, take it, but leave the sonogram photos. Those are mine." She took them down herself, one by one, 3 frames. She held them against her chest. She walked out of the room and did not look back. Delphine's spare room was on the 2nd floor of a converted townhouse above her bakery. It smelled like yeast and cinnamon. The bed had a quilt on it. The quilt had flowers. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed. She still held the 3 sonogram photos. Delphine sat next to her. "Oh, honey," Delphine said. "I have $40,000, Eleanor said. "That's all he left me, on paper." "Ellie, look at me." Eleanor looked at her. "You have $40,000. You have a lawyer. You have me. You have that baby. And you have every single year of every single skill you have ever developed. That is a lot. Do you hear me? That is a lot." Eleanor nodded. She did not trust her voice. Delphine stood up. She said, "I'm making you soup and grilled cheese, and you are going to eat both." She left the room. Eleanor lay down on the bed, on her left side, her hand on her belly. She looked at the sonogram photos on the nightstand. She scrolled through her phone. Their wedding pictures. She had kept them in a folder titled Our Day. She looked at a picture of Graham crying when she walked down the aisle. Real tears, down his face. She thought, was that real? Was any of it real? She scrolled through more. The Paris trip, the ski weekend in Vermont, the anniversary dinner last spring. Each picture was poison now. Each one made her want to throw her phone across the room. She did not throw it. She put it face down on the nightstand. Her phone rang. It was Whitney. Whitney, her maid of honor, her college roommate, the woman who had given the toast at her wedding. Eleanor stared at the name for 4 rings. She answered on the 5th. "Ellie," Whitney said, "I just heard. My God, I'm so sorry. How did you hear? There was a pause, a long one. Tessa told me, Whitney said. Eleanor sat up in bed. The room tilted. Whitney, she said, how do you know Tessa? The pause was longer this time. When Whitney spoke, her voice was small. She's my cousin, Ellie. Tessa Bainbridge is my cousin. I thought you knew. I mean, I thought this was some kind of arrangement you two had worked out. Eleanor could not feel her feet. Whitney, she said, how long have you known they were together? 8 months, Whitney said. Maybe 9. Ellie, I'm so sorry. I thought... But Eleanor hung up. She set the phone down on the nightstand, face down again. She lay back. She stared at the ceiling, old wooden beams, a crack in the plaster. She thought about Whitney's wedding toast. To the most honest, loyal couple I've ever known. Graham, you better take care of her, because if you don't, you'll answer to me. Everyone had laughed. Everyone had known. The next afternoon, Eleanor drove to Delphine's bakery. She parked in the spot out front. She turned off the engine. She did not go inside. She sat in the driver's seat. She watched through the big front window. A mother came in with a toddler. The toddler had ice cream on his face. The mother pulled a napkin out of her purse. She wiped his mouth. She laughed at something he said. Eleanor watched them. For 42 minutes, her hands on the steering wheel, her belly pressing against it. She did not cry. She did not move. She thought about everything she had lost. Her house, her husband, her friend, her future as she had imagined it. She thought, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. Finally, she put the car in reverse. She drove back to the townhouse. She climbed the stairs. She got into bed. She slept for 14 hours. 3 days later, the contractions started. Eleanor was in Delphine's kitchen, eating a piece of sourdough toast. She felt the first one as a tightening, then another, then a harder one that made her put her hand on the counter. Del, she called out. Del, something is happening. Delphine came running. She took one look at Eleanor's face. She grabbed her keys. She said, Hospital, now. I'll call Rowan on the way. Eleanor said, It's too early. I'm only 37 weeks. It's fine, Delphine said. 37 weeks is full term, honey. Come on. In the passenger seat of Delphine's Subaru, Eleanor gripped the handle above the window. Another contraction squeezed her. She breathed through it. She tried to call Graham. He did not answer. She called again. He did not answer. She sent a text. In labor. Headed to St. Luke's. No response. Delphine pulled up to the emergency entrance. She helped Eleanor out of the car. She took her inside. She filled out paperwork while Eleanor was wheeled to a delivery room. The nurse asked, Emergency contact? Eleanor took a breath. She said, Delphine Carver. She's my sister. It was the first lie she had told in a long time. It was also the truest thing she had said in months. I deserved better than this, she said out loud, to no one, as the nurse set up the IV. I deserved a husband who answered the phone. The nurse paused. She squeezed Eleanor's shoulder. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Graham did not come. He sent a text at 2:14 in the morning. Let me know when he's born. I'm in Aspen. Aspen. Eleanor read the text between contractions. She handed the phone to Delphine. She said, Throw it. Delphine did not throw it. Delphine held her hand instead. She said, Push, sweetheart. You can do this. Push. Eleanor pushed. At 6:43 in the morning, after 31 hours of labor, Eleanor Prescott Whitfield gave birth to a baby boy. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, 19 inches long, a shock of dark hair, and a cry that filled the delivery room like he was claiming territory. The nurse placed him on Eleanor's chest. Warm, slippery, loud, alive. Eleanor looked down at him, at the tiny, red, wrinkled face. at the fists already swinging, at the mouth already rooting. She did not think about Graham. She thought about her own father. Her father who had died when she was 12. Her father who had taught her to ride a bike in the driveway of their ranch house, who had danced with her on her 11th birthday, who had never gotten to meet this baby. She whispered, "Hi, Caleb, I'm your mom, and I'm going to be enough. I promise. I'm going to be enough for both of us." She said his name for the first time, Caleb. It meant faithful. She had chosen the name months ago. She had not told Graham. She had been saving it as a surprise. Now it was just hers. Hers and her son's. She counted his fingers. She counted them again. A third time. Just to be sure. Every mother does this. Every single one. Delphine stood in the doorway, crying. She said, "Ellie, he's perfect. He's perfect." Eleanor nodded. She could not speak. She was too full of something she did not have a name for. Not love, exactly. Love was too small a word. This was bigger. This was the feeling of meeting the person you had been waiting for your whole life without knowing you had been waiting. Rowan Callahan came to the hospital room the next day. He brought coffee for Delphine. He brought a small stuffed rabbit for Caleb. He sat in the chair by the window. He did not look at the baby too long. He looked like a man who did not quite know what to do with hospital rooms. He said, "Mrs. Whitfield." "Eleanor," she said. "Just Eleanor." "Eleanor, we have some decisions to make. Your husband has not come. That is being noted. I know. He sent flowers, white lilies. They arrived at the nursing station an hour ago." Eleanor laughed. A short, hard laugh. She said, "Lilies are for funerals, Rowan." I thought the same thing. She looked at Caleb, sleeping in the plastic bassinet beside her bed. She said, "What do I do now?" Rowan leaned forward. He put his elbows on his knees. He said, "You can collapse, or you can fight. There is no third door, but I need to know. Which one?" Eleanor looked at her son, his small mouth open in sleep, his tiny fist curled next to his cheek. She said, "Fight." "Good," Rowan said, "because I have something to show you." He pulled a folder out of his briefcase. He handed it to her. Inside were printouts, bank statements, wire transfers, account numbers. "Offshore account in the Caymans," Rowan said. $14 million. Opened 8 months before your son was born. The account is under an LLC named TB Holdings. Eleanor read the name, TB Holdings. Her husband had named his mistress Fund after his mistress. She closed the folder. She said, "What else? The mistress has been with him longer than we thought. I have a source, former assistant, who is willing to testify. She says the affair started at least 3 years ago." 3 years, Eleanor repeated. The baby had been born 36 hours ago. 3 years. "I need to verify," Rowan said. "But yes, 3 years at least." Eleanor thought about 3 years ago. Their anniversary in Napa. The surprise trip to Italy for her 30th birthday. The weekend at the lake house where Graham had cooked her pancakes in his boxer shorts. She thought all of it was a lie. She looked at Caleb. She looked at Rowan. She said, "Let's begin." Graham came to the hospital on day 3. He walked into the room in a suit. He was tan. His hair was a little longer. Aspen tan, not hospital tan. He walked to the bassinet. He looked down at his son. He said, "Hey, buddy." He reached in. He picked Caleb up. He held him like a package. He held him for exactly 11 minutes. Eleanor watched the clock. She did not trust herself to speak. Then Graham pulled out his phone. He asked a nurse to take a photo. He smiled at the camera. He thanked the nurse. He handed the baby back to Eleanor. He said, "I know this is complicated, but Caleb deserves to know his father loves him." Eleanor said, "Get out, Graham." "Ellie, get out. Now." Graham left. A week later, a photo appeared on a celebrity gossip site. Graham holding his newborn son. The caption read, Whitfield heir and his new pride. Sources say Eleanor has struggled with postpartum issues. Graham is being incredibly patient. Eleanor read it in Delphine's apartment. She was sitting on the couch. Caleb was asleep on her chest. She was still in a robe. She had not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in 9 days. She read the article twice. She thought, this is how he is going to do it. He is going to make me the crazy one, the broken one, and the world is going to believe him because he is handsome and rich and charming, and I am tired. She thought about giving up. For about 7 minutes, she thought about giving up. Then Caleb made a small sound against her collarbone, a tiny hiccup, a baby sound, a real sound. She put her hand on his back. She whispered, I'm not tired anymore. Mommy is not tired anymore. She called Rowan. She said, I want everything. I want a countersuit. I want a paternity test that shuts his mouth. I want the judge to know who he is. I want all of it. Do you hear me? Rowan said. I hear you, Eleanor. Welcome to the fight. The divorce dragged 16 months. Graham's legal team was ruthless. They were also well paid. They deposed Eleanor 3 times. They subpoenaed her medical records. They argued she was mentally unfit. They leaked stories to tabloids. They offered her $80,000 and a confidentiality agreement, pocket change to keep your mouth shut. Eleanor refused. She sat through every deposition with a nursing bra under her blouse. She fed Caleb in the hallway of the courthouse during breaks. She lost 17 pounds in 3 months because she forgot to eat. Delphine left containers of food on her porch every morning. Rowan and his team found everything: the offshore account, the assistant who would testify, emails, flight records, hotel receipts, a video from a security camera in a Manhattan lobby. They found one more thing, something Rowan called Eleanor about on a Tuesday evening when Caleb was 14 months old and just learning to stand. Eleanor, sit down. I'm sitting. The former assistant, her name is Beatrice Penn. She came in today. She wanted to be on record, and she told me something I need you to hear. Okay? Graham and Tessa have been together for 9 years. Eleanor did not speak. Which means, Rowan said carefully, they started dating 2 years before your wedding. Eleanor still did not speak. Eleanor, are you there? I'm here. I'm so sorry. Eleanor looked across the room. Caleb was holding onto the coffee table, wobbling, grinning at her with his 4 new teeth. She said, Okay, thank you for telling me. She hung up. She walked to Caleb. She picked him up. He laughed. He grabbed her hair. She thought, the hardest part is admitting I knew all along. I knew something was off, and I stayed, because leaving was scarier than knowing. She thought, never again. I will never live like that again. She kissed Caleb's forehead. He smelled like baby shampoo and applesauce. She said out loud, Buddy, we are going to build a life, you and me. We are going to build it so good that when we look back at this, we won't even recognize ourselves. Caleb said, Bah. Eleanor laughed. She said, Bah, indeed. The judge ruled 6 weeks later. Eleanor got child support. She got a modest percentage of the prenup marital assets, $410,000. She did not get the penthouse. She did not get the Hamptons house. She did not get the cars. She got custody, full custody. Graham received 1 weekend a month. The judge had not been impressed by Aspen. Eleanor signed the final papers in Rowan's office. She wore a navy blazer. Her hair was in a low ponytail. She had put on lipstick. Rowan walked her to the elevator. He said, You did a hard thing. Be proud of yourself. Eleanor said, I don't feel proud yet. I just feel tired. That will come, Rowan said. She drove home. Home was now a rented two-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. She had painted Caleb's room pale yellow, the same color as the nursery she had left behind. She had done it on purpose, a private ritual. She walked in. Delphine was there, watching Caleb. Caleb was eating Cheerios off a plastic plate on the kitchen floor. Eleanor said, "It's done." Delphine hugged her for a long time. After Delphine left, Eleanor sat on the kitchen floor. Caleb climbed into her lap. He pushed a Cheerio into her mouth. She ate it. Then she stood up. She put Caleb to bed. She washed her face. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She said, "Okay, what are we doing next?" It was not a question. It was a statement. A challenge to the woman in the mirror. The woman in the mirror did not answer yet, but she was listening. 3 months after the divorce, Delphine brought over a pot of chili and an idea. They ate at Eleanor's small kitchen table. Caleb was in his high chair. He had chili on his face. He had chili in his hair. He was delighted. Delphine said, "Do you remember my 40th birthday party?" "Of course. You planned the whole thing. You remember? You did the florals, you did the menu, you hired the band. My ex-husband cried. Everyone cried. It was the best night of my life." Eleanor smiled. "It was a fun party." "Ellie, you planned the best wedding I have ever been to. You planned the best birthdays. You planned the best everything. You should do this for a living." Eleanor laughed. She shook her head. She said, "I'm 33 years old. I have a baby. I have $400,000 that has to last a long time. I can't start a business right now." "Okay," Delphine said. "Don't start a business. Start by doing one party. For my friend Marcy. She wants to throw her husband a surprise 50th. She has no idea what she's doing. Charge her $2,000. See what happens." Eleanor looked at Caleb. He was offering her a handful of chili. She said, "Okay." She did not know, sitting in her kitchen that night, that she had just said yes to the rest of her life. Marcy's husband's 50th birthday party was on a Saturday in May. Eleanor did the florals herself. White peonies and eucalyptus. She hired a jazz trio she had found on a local music website. She designed the menu around the husband's favorite foods: steak, oysters, a bourbon tasting. She invoiced $2,000. She made $380 in profit after costs. She did not care. Marcy cried at the end of the night. She hugged Eleanor. She said, "I don't know how to thank you." 2 weeks later, 3 of Marcy's friends called. 6 months later, Eleanor booked her first $10,000 event. A year after that, she rented a tiny office on the second floor of a building 2 blocks from Delphine's bakery. She painted the door navy blue. She stenciled the words, "Prescott and Company Events" in gold. She had taken back her maiden name. She had also started a ritual. Every time she signed a new contract, she wrote her name with a specific fountain pen, dark blue ink, her own name, Eleanor Prescott. She said it out loud every time. Eleanor Prescott, Eleanor Prescott, Eleanor Prescott. The years did not pass quickly, but they passed. Caleb learned to walk. Caleb learned to run. Caleb learned to say the word mommy with such certainty that it became Eleanor's favorite sound in the world. Caleb turned 2. He turned 3. He turned 4. Graham saw him 3 times in those first 3 years. Total. Graham sent a card for Caleb's 4th birthday. A generic card, signed in his assistant's handwriting. A check for $500 inside. Eleanor put the check in a savings account for Caleb's college. She threw the card away. Caleb was 4 years old on the day he walked into the bathroom, found Eleanor sitting on the edge of the tub crying, and asked the question. He had been playing with his trucks. He had come to find her. He stood in the bathroom doorway in his pajamas. Fire trucks and ambulances. He said, "Mommy, why are you crying?" Eleanor wiped her face. She smiled the smile mothers smile when they are caught. She said, "Sometimes grown-ups cry because they're proud. I'm proud of us, baby." Caleb nodded, serious. He walked over. He put his small hand on her knee. He said, "I'm proud of us too, Mommy." Eleanor laughed through her barsabamas. She pulled him into her lap. She held him so tight he squirmed. She did not tell him, "Your father has not called in 7 months." She did not tell him, "I was crying because I saw on Instagram that his girlfriend is pregnant now, and I am a grown woman, and it should not hurt anymore, but some days it still does." She did not tell him, "I am crying because I love you so much, it frightens me." She just held him, and she said, "You and me, buddy. We are the team." Caleb said, "We are the team." Caleb turned 5, then 6. On his first day of kindergarten, Eleanor packed his lunch, a sandwich cut into the shape of a dinosaur, apple slices, a note she had written in crayon, "I love you to the moon. Be brave." She walked him to the bus stop. She kissed his forehead. She watched him climb onto the bus. She waved until the bus turned the corner. Then she went home. She stood in the middle of her kitchen. She cried for 20 minutes. That afternoon, when she picked him up, his teacher pulled her aside. "Miss Prescott, a quick word." Eleanor's heart clenched. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, yes. Caleb had a wonderful first day. I just wanted to mention, in our family drawing exercise today, Caleb drew only 2 people, a woman and a boy. When I asked if he wanted to add a father, he said, very matter of fact, "I don't have one. I have a mom. I wanted you to know he's okay." He said it with no sadness. He seemed very at peace. Eleanor smiled. She said, "Thank you for telling me." She walked out of the school. She held Caleb's hand. She asked him about his day. He told her about the class turtle and the boy named Marcus, who had 2 pet ferrets. She drove him home. She made him macaroni and cheese. She read him 2 books. She tucked him in. Then she walked into her bedroom. She closed the door. She sat down on the floor of her closet. She pulled her knees up to her chest as much as she could, and she sobbed, silently, so he could not hear, for 45 minutes. "He doesn't know what he's missing," she whispered in the dark. "But I do. Every single day I know. And that's the worst part of being the good parent, carrying both sides of what he walked away from." After she was done, she stood up. She washed her face. She baked her mother's peach cobbler at 11 at night. The kitchen filled with the smell of butter and cinnamon. Caleb came downstairs in his dinosaur pajamas. He sat at the counter. He ate 2 pieces of cobbler. He said, "Mom, you're the best." She said, "I know, baby. I know." Caleb was 7 years old when the envelope arrived. It was a Thursday afternoon in October. Eleanor was at her office. The business had grown. She had 6 employees now. $2 million in annual revenue. She had just bought a brownstone in a neighborhood she had always admired. Her name on the deed, no one else's. The first time in her life she had owned her own home. Her assistant brought the envelope to her desk. Thick cream-colored paper, hand-delivered, a gold foil monogram in the top corner, the Whitfield Foundation. Eleanor's hands went cold. She opened it. A request for proposal. The Whitfield Foundation was soliciting bids for their annual gala. 300 guests, a historic mansion venue, a budget of $400,000 for the evening. They wanted Prescott and Company Events to submit a proposal. Eleanor read the letter 3 times. Then she walked to the window. She looked out at the street, a woman pushing a stroller, a man walking a dog, a maple tree losing its orange leaves. She thought, "They want me. They don't know who I am." Then she thought, "Or they know exactly who I am." She called the number on the letter. A woman picked up. "Whitfield Foundation? This is Beatrice." Eleanor paused. "Beatrice Penn?" A soft inhale on the other end. Then, yes. Hello, Eleanor. You work there now. I took over as director of events 18 months ago. I left Graham's company 5 years ago. I've been waiting, honestly. I have been waiting for the right moment to reach out to you. Eleanor sat down in her chair. Beatrice? Eleanor, listen to me. I have files, paper files, expense reports, hotel receipts, internal emails, things I kept, things I knew I might need someday. I have been keeping them for you. If you want them, they're yours. Eleanor stared at her desk, at the fountain pen she used to sign contracts. Dark blue ink, her own name. She said, I'd like to come in to discuss the gala this week. Is that possible? Friday at 10, Beatrice said. I'll put you on the calendar. The Whitfield Foundation office was on the 24th floor of a glass tower downtown. Eleanor wore a charcoal suit, small pearl earrings. She carried a leather portfolio. She walked through the lobby with her head high. She had practiced this walk in her bathroom that morning, twice. Beatrice met her at the elevator. They walked into a conference room. Coffee, water, a plate of fresh fruit. Beatrice closed the door. She sat across from Eleanor. First, Beatrice said, I want to say, I'm sorry. I knew what he was doing. I saw the bookings. I saw the flight plans. I didn't tell you. I had a mortgage. I had 2 small children. I told myself it wasn't my place. It was cowardly of me. I've thought about it every day for 9 years. Eleanor nodded. She said, Beatrice? Thank you. That means something. Here is the situation, Beatrice said. The foundation board is mostly independent of Graham. His mother, Marguerite, is the chair. Graham attends as a major donor. He will be at this event. Tessa, his wife now, will be there. They got married 4 years ago. I assume you knew? I knew? The gala is important to Marguerite. She has been pushing for a change in vendor for 2 years. The old vendor was boring. She asked for my recommendations. I recommended you. She does not know who you are. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Marguerite does not know. Marguerite knew you as a daughter-in-law for 7 years, but you go by Prescott now, and she never really looked at you when you were married to her son. I think you could walk past her tomorrow, and she would not recognize you. I'm sorry to say that. Eleanor laughed, a short, dry laugh. That's actually on brand for her. Beatrice smiled. So, the question is, do you want the job? Because if you do, I am going to push for it. Hard. And I think we can win. Eleanor looked at her portfolio, at the pen in her hand, at the woman across from her who had waited 9 years to make this right. She said, I want it. Good, Beatrice said. Second question, do you want the files? Eleanor thought about it. She thought about it carefully. She said, not yet. I don't want this to be about blackmail. I don't want Graham to think I am still playing his game. I want to win this on my work. And if I need them someday, I will come for them. Beatrice nodded slowly. You are a remarkable woman, Eleanor. I'm just a woman, Eleanor said. But thank you. She drove home. Caleb was at a play date. The brownstone was quiet. She took off her shoes in the hallway. She walked to the kitchen. She opened a bottle of wine. She called Delphine. She told her everything. Delphine listened. Then she said, Ellie, honey, are you sure? Seeing him again, seeing her, that is a lot. Eleanor thought about it. She stood at her kitchen counter. She watched the last of the sunset through her window. She said, Del, I am going to plan the best gala that family has ever seen. And I am going to do it wearing a dress that costs more than my first car. And I am not going to cry, because I cried for 4 years. I am done crying. Delphine said, That's my girl. Eleanor said, And when I see Graham, I am not going to say a word he does not deserve. I am just going to do my job, and then I am going to go home to my son and sleep in a bed that nobody bought for me." Delphine said, "That is the most expensive dress in the world, Eleanor." Eleanor laughed. She wiped her eyes. She said, "Yeah, I guess it is." This, She won the gala contract 2 weeks later. Marguerite Whitfield signed the paperwork in her corner office. She did not look up at Eleanor's face the entire meeting. She looked at the floor plans. She looked at the proposals. She looked at her watch. She said, "Miss Prescott, you have excellent taste. We will see if the execution matches the pitch." Eleanor said, "It will." She walked out of the office. Into the elevator. She stood there alone. She whispered to the mirrored wall, "He's going to see me, Mom. He's going to see me, and I am going to be the woman he threw away." The elevator opened on the ground floor. Eleanor walked out. She held her head high. She did not look back. Sullivan Hartwell had been hired 6 months earlier. He was the architect the foundation had brought on to redesign the mansion's ballroom layout. Marguerite had wanted better sightlines, a stage for the auction, a room for the orchestra. Sully had drawn up the plans. He had been showing up to site visits every other week since spring. Eleanor met him on a Tuesday in November. A walkthrough of the venue, 6 weeks before the gala. She had been expecting a man in his 60s, tweed, a bow tie, and affectation. Sully was in his early 40s. Jeans, a navy sweater, a pencil behind his ear, a face that had been out in weather, a quiet voice, kind eyes. He shook her hand. He said, "Eleanor Prescott, I've heard about you from Beatrice. She said, you're the best in the city." Eleanor said, "Beatrice is generous." "She's accurate," Sully said. "I looked up your work. You really are the best." Eleanor blushed. She had not blushed in 9 years. She cleared her throat. They walked the ballroom together. She showed him her vision for the flow. He told her where his structural load-bearing points would be. They worked well together. They disagreed about one thing, the height of the stage, and neither of them took it personally. At the end of the walkthrough, he said, "Can I buy you a coffee?" Eleanor hesitated. She said, "I appreciate the offer, Sully, but I don't date." He nodded. He did not argue. He did not push. He said, "That's fair. Friendly coffee, then, if you ever want it." He handed her his card. He walked out. Eleanor stood in the empty ballroom. For a long moment, she looked at the card in her hand. She put it in her wallet. She thought, maybe someday, not now, but maybe someday. And the fact that she could imagine a someday, for the first time in 9 years, that felt like its own small, quiet revolution. The weeks before the gala were a blur. Eleanor worked 16-hour days. She slept 5 hours a night. She drank too much coffee. She lived in black jeans and soft sweaters. Caleb spent more time than usual with Delphine. He did not seem to mind. He loved Delphine. He loved the bakery. He came home smelling like vanilla. 2 days before the gala, he said to Eleanor, "Mom, are you nervous about your big party?" Eleanor was making his dinner. Spaghetti with meat sauce. She said, "A little bit, buddy, but I know what I'm doing." "Can I come?" She turned from the stove. She looked at him. He was sitting at the kitchen island, coloring a picture of a fire truck. He was so small. He was so much bigger than he had been a year ago. She said, "Buddy, it's a fancy grown-up party. It goes very late. You would be bored. I could come for a little bit, to see where you work. I just want to see it. Then I will go home with Aunt Dell." Eleanor hesitated. She looked at him, at the serious expression on his 7-year-old face. She thought about it. Graham might be there, Tessa might be there, Marguerite would be there, but Caleb would not know any of them. Caleb did not know his own grandmother's face because Marguerite had never asked to meet him. Not once. In 7 years. And if Graham saw him, Graham, who had not laid eyes on his son in almost 2 years, what would happen? Eleanor thought about it for a long moment. She thought, he would freeze. He would freeze, because he would see what he walked away from. The thought was small at first. Then it grew. She did not want revenge. She was past revenge. But she was not past truth. And the truth was that her son was a real person. A magnificent, whole, funny, kind, real person. And his father had chosen not to know him. That was Graham's loss. That was not Caleb's secret to carry. She said, "You can come for 20 minutes, wearing your best suit. Aunt Dell will bring you and take you home. You have to promise me you will be polite. You have to say hello to the hostess. You have to try 3 bites of whatever appetizer Aunt Dell picks. Deal?" Caleb considered. He said, "Deal." He went back to his fire truck. Eleanor turned back to the stove. Her hands were shaking, just a little. She whispered to herself, "Okay, okay, okay." 3 times. The same 3 times she had whispered the night she found out. It was the same word. It meant something different now. The mansion was on a hill. Its windows glowed gold through the cold air. 300 guests in long dresses and tuxedos moved through rooms lit with candles and chandeliers. A string quartet played in the corner. Champagne fountains at both ends of the ballroom. White roses everywhere. White roses on every table. White roses climbing the columns. Eleanor walked through the crowd with a clipboard and a headset. She wore an ivory silk dress. Not white, not cream. Something in between, with a collar that covered her throat, small pearl earrings. Her hair in a low chignon. No jewelry, no ring. Nothing that could catch. She had spent 6 weeks preparing this night. She was every bit the professional she had spent 7 years becoming. She saw Graham at 8:15. He was at the bar, glass of champagne in his hand, Tessa on his arm, Tessa in a red dress, long blonde hair, smaller than Eleanor remembered, younger than Eleanor remembered. Graham was tired. That was the first thing Eleanor noticed. Tired in a way money could not hide. His hair was thinner. There were lines around his mouth. He laughed too loud at something a donor said. Eleanor walked past him. 10 feet away. He did not see her. She did not look at him. She walked into the kitchen. She checked on the salmon. She consulted with the caterer about timing. She walked back out. Beatrice found her near the coat room. She squeezed Eleanor's elbow. She said, "The salmon is perfect. Marguerite is already talking about next year," Eleanor said. "Good." Her headset crackled. The caterer said, "Appetizer service in 8 minutes." Eleanor walked through the crowd again. Past tables, past a violinist, past a senator's wife who looked at her dress and said, "That is a beautiful dress, dear. Who made it?" Eleanor smiled. She said, "A woman I met last year, a local designer." She kept walking. At the edge of the ballroom, by the entrance, she saw Delphine. Caleb stood next to her, small, 7 years old, wearing a navy suit, a clip-on tie, his dark hair combed, his face solemn. Eleanor's whole chest opened. She knelt down. She straightened his tie. She smoothed his hair. She whispered, "You look so handsome, buddy. 5 minutes. Then Aunt Dell takes you home. She's going to bring you pizza." Caleb nodded. He looked around the ballroom, his eyes wide. He said, "Mom, this is so pretty." Eleanor said, "Thank you, buddy. I made it pretty for you, too." She stood up. She took his small hand. She did not plan what happened next. She truly did not. She just turned, with her son's hand in hers, and walked 3 steps into the ballroom so he could see the chandeliers, so he could see the ice sculptures, so he could see the string quartet. And that was when Graham turned around at the bar. He turned with a glass of champagne in his hand. He saw Eleanor first. His face did not change. For a half second, he did not fully register her. She had gotten older. She had gotten sharper. She had become someone his brain had to translate. Then he saw the boy. Eleanor saw the exact moment. She watched his face. His eyes moved from her face down to the small person whose hand she was holding. The glass tilted. A splash of champagne hit Graham's shoe. He did not notice. He was looking at his son. The dark hair, the serious face, the Whitfield nose, his own nose, on a smaller face, his own jaw, his own straight eyebrows, his own son, his son whom he had not seen in more than a year, his son whom he had chosen not to know. Graham froze. Tessa, beside him, followed his gaze. She went pale. She understood immediately. She tightened her grip on his elbow. He did not feel it. Marguerite, across the room, turned toward her son. She had caught the movement in her peripheral vision. She saw the boy. She saw Eleanor. Her hand went to her throat. Her mouth opened slightly. Beatrice, a tanpatsu, behind the bar, stopped pouring. She set the bottle down. The quartet kept playing. The donors kept talking. The ice sculptures kept melting. But in the space where Graham and Eleanor and Caleb stood, time had stopped. Graham walked over, slowly. People moved aside for him. He was the host. He was also a man who did not quite know where his own feet were. He stopped 3 feet from Eleanor. He set his glass on a passing waiter's tray. He did not take his eyes off the child. He said, "Eleanor." His voice was rough, something stripped. Eleanor said, "Mr. Whitfield, the appetizer service begins at 9:15. I'll make sure you and your table are served first." Professional, crisp, nothing else. Graham did not seem to hear her. He looked at the boy. He said, "Caleb, you've gotten so big." Caleb tilted his head up at Eleanor, the same way he did when he did not recognize a word and wanted her to translate. He looked at the tall man, the man with the champagne on his shoe, the man who had just said his name. Caleb said, very politely, "Sorry, sir. Do I know you?" The silence that followed was the largest silence Eleanor had ever heard. It was not a silence of sound. The quartet still played. The donors still talked. A waiter still moved past them with a tray. But within that silence, around the 4 people standing in the circle of Graham's reckoning, there was nothing at all. Graham opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer. Because the answer was, "No, son. You don't know me. You don't know me because I chose not to know you. Because I was busy with a woman in Aspen. Because I was busy hiding money. Because I was busy pretending you were not mine. Because I thought I had better options. Because I was a fool." He could not say any of that. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Caleb's shoulder. Her thumb moved softly against his small collarbone. She said, "Buddy, this is Mr. Whitfield. He's the man who's throwing this party tonight. Say hello." Caleb held out his small hand. He had been taught manners. He said, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Whitfield. You have a very nice house." Graham looked at the small hand. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might fall. His knees softened. He caught himself. He took Caleb's hand. He shook it. He said, "Thank you. It's very nice to meet you too." Caleb smiled. A polite 7-year-old smile. He turned back to Eleanor. He said, "Mom, can I go see the ice swan?" Eleanor said, "Go with Aunt Dell, buddy. Tell her I said you can have a cookie." Caleb ran off. Delphine caught him by the hand. She gave Eleanor a long look over her shoulder. She steered Caleb toward the dessert table. Then toward the door. Then out. Eleanor turned back to Graham. He was still staring after the boy. She said, "If you'll excuse me, I have 300 guests to feed. She walked past him. She did not look back. The rest of the gala happened. Eleanor ran it flawlessly. The salmon was served at 9:15 exactly. The auction raised $1.2 million. The dessert course was a chocolate ganache with gold leaf. The senator's wife cried during the keynote. The quartet played on. Graham left at 10:30. He did not say goodbye. Tessa practically pulled him out, her red dress disappearing through the double doors. Marguerite Whitfield stayed until the end. At 11:40, as the crowd was thinning, Marguerite found Eleanor by the coat room. She stood very straight. Her silver hair was pinned up. She wore diamonds that Eleanor recognized. She said, "Miss Prescott." Eleanor said, "Mrs. Whitfield." They looked at each other for a long moment. Marguerite said, "I was not kind to you. I believed my son. I was wrong. I have no excuse for 7 years of silence. I am not going to pretend I do." Eleanor did not speak. She let the old woman finish. Marguerite reached into her clutch. She pulled out a small velvet box. She pressed it into Eleanor's hand. "It was my grandmother's," Marguerite said. "A pin. A small one. I want it to go to your son when he is old enough. I will not insult you by asking to be in his life. That is your decision. But this should be his, whatever you decide." Eleanor looked at the velvet box in her palm. She nodded. She said, "I will keep it for him. Thank you." Marguerite nodded once. She walked away, her back perfectly straight. Eleanor watched her go. She thought, that was the closest that woman has come to an apology in her entire life. I will take it. Graham found her near the coat room 3 minutes later. She had not expected him to come back. He had. He had returned without Tessa. He was slightly drunk. His tie was loosened. He said, "Ellie, please." She turned. She said, "Mr. Whitfield, don't call me that. Please, I need to talk to you." She looked at him. She waited. He said, "I made a mistake. I know. I made so many mistakes. I didn't understand. I didn't understand what I was walking away from. Please, let me know him. He's my son." Eleanor took a long, slow breath. She said, "Graham, look at me." He looked at her. "You had 8 years to know him. You chose not to. That was not a mistake. That was a decision. One you made over and over again. Every birthday, every Christmas, every phone call you didn't return. You decided. Ellie, fatherhood is earned, like everything worth having. You didn't earn it, and you don't get to walk up to a little boy in a navy suit and call yourself dad because you suddenly saw what you threw away." Graham's eyes filled. He reached out. He did not touch her. His hand hovered. He said, "I loved you." Eleanor looked at him. Really looked. She said quietly, "No, Graham. You loved the idea of me. Those are different things. I know the difference now." She walked past him. This time, it was the last time. Outside, on the terrace, the cold air was a gift. Eleanor leaned on the stone railing. She could see her breath. She heard footsteps behind her. She did not turn. Sully Hartwell stopped a polite distance away. He said, "I don't want to interrupt. I just saw you come out here. I thought you might want some water." He handed her a glass of water. She took it. She drank it slowly. She said, "Thank you, Sully." He said, "You okay?" She considered the question. She said, "I will be." He nodded. He said, "Good." They stood in silence for a moment, a comfortable silence. Eleanor said, "Sully, I think I would like that coffee now, if the offer still stands." Sully smiled, a real smile, slow, warm. He said, "The offer stands." "Saturday," she said. 10, the cafe on Mulberry Street. "I'll be there," he said. He left her alone on the terrace. She watched the stars. She breathed cold air. She felt her own heart, steady and quiet, in her chest. On her way to the valet, Tessa stopped her. Tessa was alone. Her makeup was smudged. Her red dress suddenly seemed too bright. She looked smaller up close, tired. Something Eleanor recognized, the specific exhaustion of a woman who had just seen, in one moment, a future she had been trying not to see for years. And Tessa said, "He's going to do this to me, isn't he?" It was not really a question. Eleanor looked at the woman she had hated for 9 years. She saw, for the first time, a person, a young woman who had made a bad choice and was now married to it, a woman who was pregnant with her second child, a woman whose husband had just walked back outside to beg another woman to forgive him. Eleanor did not feel victory. She did not feel pity either. She felt something clearer than both. She said, "Probably. But that's your road to walk, not mine." Tessa nodded. She said, "I'm sorry. I was young. I know that doesn't fix it." Eleanor said, "It doesn't, but I hear you." She walked to the valet. She got into her car. She drove home. At 2 in the morning, Eleanor came through her own front door. Delphine was asleep on the couch. The television murmured. A throw blanket had slipped to the floor. Eleanor picked it up, covered her friend. She climbed the stairs. Caleb was asleep in his bed, his small face soft, his mouth slightly open. Fire truck pajamas, her son. She sat on the edge of his bed. She watched him sleep for a long time. She thought about the young woman who had stood in a nursery 8 years ago, listening to a voice through a baby monitor. 8 months pregnant, hand on the wall. She thought, if I could go back, I would tell that woman, "You are going to survive this. You are going to do more than survive. You are going to build something. You are going to raise this kind boy. You are going to learn that the worst thing that ever happened to you was also the door to everything good." She bent down. She kissed Caleb's forehead. He stirred. He opened his eyes halfway. He said, "Mom?" She said, "I'm here, buddy. Go back to sleep." He said, "Was it a good party?" She smiled. She said, "It was. It was a very good party." He said, "I saw the ice swan. It was the best one. And Aunt Dell let me have 2 cookies." "I won't tell," Eleanor whispered. "Mom?" "Yes, baby." "Who was that man?" "The tall one." Eleanor took a slow breath. She had been rehearsing this answer in her head for 7 years. She had thought she would be ready. She was ready. She said, "He is someone I used to be married to, before you were born. He made some choices that weren't very kind. So we made our own family, you and me, and it turned out to be the best family I could have ever wanted." Caleb thought about this for a long moment. He was almost back asleep. His words slurred a little. He said, "Mom, I like our family." "Me too, buddy. Go to sleep." He was out in 30 seconds. Eleanor sat on the edge of his bed. She stayed there a long time. She did not cry. She did not rage. She did not triumph. She just was. She thought, whole. That is the word. I am whole. Sunday morning, she took Caleb to the park. The sun was out. The trees were almost bare. Caleb swung on the swing. He told her, proudly, that he had decided he wanted to be an architect, like Mr. Hartwell. They had met at the gala, briefly, when Sully had waved at Caleb across the room. Caleb had waved back. Eleanor laughed. She pushed him higher. She said, "Whatever you want to be, baby. Whatever you want to be." Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out. A text from Sully. Saturday confirmed. Looking forward to it. She smiled. She thought about the woman she had been 8 years ago, locking and unlocking her phone on the kitchen counter, waiting for an explanation that was never going to come. She locked her phone, unlocked it, locked it, unlocked it. Not a panicked ritual, a different rhythm now, the rhythm of a woman choosing to answer someone she liked. She typed back, Me too. See you then. She put the phone away. 3 months later, Prescott and Company Events was booked solid through the following year. Eleanor hired 2 more planners. She bought the building her office was in. She painted the door a deeper navy. She saw Sully every Saturday, then Saturdays and Wednesdays, then most days. He was patient. He was kind. He did not push. Caleb liked him. Delphine liked him. 6 months after the gala, Sully asked if he could cook dinner at Eleanor's brownstone. She said yes. He made a roast chicken and asked her about her day. Really asked. He listened. He did not interrupt. Eleanor watched him across the kitchen island. She thought, this is what it feels like. This is what it is supposed to feel like. She did not marry him right away. She was in no rush. She had learned to be in no rush, but she let him into her life. A little at a time, door by door, room by room. On a Sunday morning, a year later, Eleanor stood at her kitchen window, coffee in her hand. Caleb was in the backyard, digging for worms, still in his pajamas. Sully was out there with him, kneeling in the dirt. Caleb was lecturing Sully about something. Sully was nodding seriously. The sun came through the maple tree. Red and orange leaves. October light. Eleanor took a slow sip of coffee. She thought of a girl in a white dress walking down an aisle 9 years ago. A girl who had cried because she thought she had found her forever. She whispered to that girl, across all the years. She said, "You did find your forever. You did. It just wasn't who you thought. It was you. It was always going to be you." She set her cup on the counter. She watched her son laugh at something Sully said. The house was quiet, in the way a house is quiet when its people are happy. She was not waiting for anyone to come home. She was home, and it was enough. It was more than enough.
If you are still here with me at the end of this story, thank you. Thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving Eleanor, and the millions of women she represents, your time and your heart tonight. Because this story is not just fiction. It is the quiet truth of so many women who are listening to my voice right now. There is a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that the person she loved most was not who she thought they were. And in that moment, everything breaks. The house she decorated, the wedding photos on the mantel, the future she had already planned in her head. All of it cracks at once. And the hardest part is not the betrayal itself. The hardest part is admitting to yourself that somewhere deep down, you knew. You knew something was wrong. You just could not bear to name it, because naming it meant losing everything. But here is the truth Eleanor learned, and it is the truth I want to leave with you tonight. Losing everything is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the beginning of the only story that was ever really yours. Eleanor did not rebuild her life by tearing Graham down. She did not waste her years plotting revenge. She did not let bitterness hollow her out. She simply did the next right thing. Day after day. She got up. She fed her baby. She answered one phone call. She planned one party. She signed one contract. She bought one small apartment, and then a bigger one. And then a brownstone that was entirely her own. She built a life so whole, so true, so quietly magnificent, that when the man who broke her finally saw her again, he had no words. Because he was standing in front of everything he had thrown away, and her son, her beautiful 7-year-old son, did not need to be taught to hurt his father. He did not need to be told to say something cruel. He simply did not recognize the man. Because a father is not a title. A father is a presence. A father is the one who shows up, the one who reads the bedtime stories, the one who comes to the kindergarten drawing exercise, the one who earns the name by living it. Fatherhood is earned. Motherhood is earned. Love is earned. Respect is earned. No amount of money, no wedding ring, no last name on a birth certificate can purchase those things. They are built, day by day, in the small, unglamorous hours when no one is watching. And for the women listening tonight who are in the middle of their own storm, I want you to hear me. You are not crazy. You are not too much. You are not too old. You are not too broken. You are not too late. The prison door has always been unlocked. You may have been your own warden for longer than you care to admit. But today, this moment, you are holding the key. You always were. You do not need to destroy anyone to win. You just need to build a life so beautiful, so honest, so fully yours, that the people who left you become the smallest footnote in a very long, very rich book. Your forever was never a man. Your forever was always you. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own strength, or of someone you love who needs to hear these words tonight, please share it with her. Send it to the friend who is crying in her car. Send it to the sister who is packing a bag. Send it to the mother who is raising her children alone and wondering if she is enough. She is enough. She has always been enough. Leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me about the woman in your life who rebuilt herself from dust. Hit that subscribe button so you will not miss our next story. Because every week, we share another story of women who refused to disappear quietly. And remember, the most powerful thing a woman can do is live well, peacefully, fully, without apology. That is the only revenge worth having. Good night, friends. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. Editorial disclaimer. This content has been carefully researched, crafted, and hand-edited by our team to bring meaning and valuable life lessons to our audience. The characters, names, and events depicted in this story are entirely fictional and created for inspirational and educational purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or to actual events, is purely coincidental. Thank you for being part of this community. Until next time.